My name is Sarah Collins, and I'm 39 years old, a lawyer. But in the most important trial of my career, what crushed me wasn't the opponent's evidence. It was the look in my own family's eyes. They weren't sitting behind me for support. They sat with the victim's family, staring at me like I was the monster. They wanted me to fail to protect the family name and were willing to trample on justice and the life of Jamal, an innocent 22-year-old kid. They smeared my name, called me a traitor, and even made veiled threats. And then, in my most desperate hour, my brother suddenly appeared in court with a shocking piece of evidence that turned the tables. But that night, he revealed the sickening truth. That evidence was just a pawn sacrificed to cover up a massive corruption scheme our entire family was drowning in. He wasn't saving me. He was burying the truth. They thought they had me backed into a corner, but they made a fatal mistake. The evidence he handed me wasn't just the key to Jamal's freedom. It's the very weapon I will use to systematically expose their entire network of corruption and destroy everything they built on the foundation of their own crimes. I went back to my apartment that night and sat on the edge of my bed staring at the wall. Their words echoed in my head like poison. Fool, reputation, mud. I poured myself a glass of cheap wine and tried to shake it off. I told myself I had heard it all before. I told myself I was used to their contempt, but the truth was it still hurt. No matter how many times I told myself I did not need their approval, some part of me always wanted it. Maybe that is what family does. They brand their expectations into your skin, and no matter how far you run, you still feel the burn. The following week, I met Jamal for the first time. They brought him into the attorney meeting room in handcuffs, his wrists raw from the metal. He looked younger than his age, lean and tall with eyes that carried exhaustion far beyond 22 years. He sat across from me and tried to act tough, but I could see his fear in the way he tapped his foot under the table. Jamal, I said softly, sliding a notepad in front of me, my name is Sarah Collins. I am your attorney. He looked at me like he was not sure if I was real. They said you just another court-appointed lawyer. They said you ain't gonna care what happens to me. I leaned forward. Let me tell you something, I do care. I care enough to fight for you like hell, but I need you to be honest with me, tell me what happened. He swallowed hard and shook his head. I didn't do it. I swear to God I didn't. I was at my cousin's house that night. We was playing video games. I didn't even know about no robbery till they came banging on my door. I studied his face. I have seen liars. I have sat across from men who spun stories like silk. But Jamal's eyes were raw and desperate, his words tumbling out like he was clinging to them to keep from drowning. All right, I said, then we are going to prove it. That was the moment he let out a breath he had been holding since the day of his arrest. It was like hope cracked through his chest for the first time in days. Walking out of that jail, I felt the weight settle on my shoulders. This was not just another case. The media was already circling. The prosecutor assigned was known for his ambition, a man who built his career on high conviction rates. And me, I was stepping into the ring alone. My family would not just refuse to help, they would stand on the sidelines hoping I failed. That night, my friend Maria came over. Maria has been my rock since law school. She is loud, Puerto Rican, never afraid to tell me when I am being reckless. She dropped a pizza on my table, kicked off her shoes, and said, "So you took the Turner case." I gave her a look. "Please don't start," she grinned. "Girl, I am not your family. I am not here to judge. I am here to tell you better eat something before you collapse." We ate straight from the box, grease dripping onto my case files. She flipped through the papers and whistled. "They really want this kid's head. Look at this, they got eyewitnesses lined up, ballistics, the whole thing." "Yeah," I muttered, "and half of it is shaky as hell." Maria leaned back. "You know what this means, though. They are going to come after you. The press, the cops, maybe even your family. You ready for that?" I sipped my soda and stared at the wall. "I don't think I have a choice. This is who I am, Maria. This is what I do." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Then we fight." Over the next few days, I threw myself into the case. I interviewed Jamal's cousin, tracked down anyone who could confirm his alibi, combed through surveillance footage frame by frame. Every time I found something that poked holes in the prosecution's story, I felt a surge of adrenaline, but I also knew the bigger picture. This was not just about evidence. This was about perception. Jamal was young, black, and poor. To a jury, that was already 3 strikes. Meanwhile, my family did everything they could to distance themselves from me. I saw an article in the local paper about the Turner case. There was a quote from Daniel saying, "This city needs to be tough on crime. We cannot let violent offenders slip through cracks in the system." He did not mention my name, but he did not have to. Everyone knew. I threw the paper in the trash. One night around midnight, I was reviewing transcripts in my office when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. A distorted voice came through the line. "Drop the Turner case." I froze. "Who is this?" the voice repeated, slower this time. "Drop the case or you will regret it." Then the line went dead. My hands were shaking. I stared at the phone like it was a snake. For a moment, I thought about calling the police. But then I remembered how many times I had seen threats brushed aside, how little protection they actually offered. I set the phone down and told myself this was just part of the job. Fear was not new to me. I had lived with it for years. Still, when I left the office that night, I checked over my shoulder more than once. Days bled into weeks. The case grew bigger. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs that said "Justice for Jamal." Reporters shoved microphones in my face every time I walked up the steps. Some called me a hero, others called me a disgrace. I learned to keep my head high and my answers short. "We will present the evidence in court. That is all I have to say." Behind closed doors, I carried the weight alone. I kept thinking about my parents, how they had not called once since I took the case. How they would rather cut me out than stand by me. I kept thinking about Daniel, who seemed to thrive on watching me stumble. And I kept wondering if I would ever be free of their shadow, or if every step I took in the courtroom was still a battle against them. One evening, as I sat on my couch surrounded by stacks of files, I caught my reflection in the dark window. I looked older than 39. Lines etched around my mouth, shadows under my eyes. I whispered to myself, "Why do you keep doing this?" And the answer came as clearly as if someone else had spoken it. "Because no one else will." That was the truth. That has always been the truth. So when the date for the preliminary hearing arrived, I put on my best suit, pulled my hair back, and walked into that courthouse with my head held high. Outside, protesters chanted Jamal's name. Inside, reporters scribbled notes, cameras clicked, and at the front of the courtroom sat my father, my mother, and Daniel. Not in support. They were sitting with the victim's family. I felt the air leave my lungs. My own blood, my own flesh, sitting on the opposite side of the courtroom, staring at me like I was the enemy. Daniel caught my eye and smirked. My father did not even acknowledge me. My mother looked away. In that moment, I knew this case would not just test my skills as a lawyer. It would test the very core of who I was, and I made a silent promise to myself. I would not back down. I would not be broken. Not by the system. Not by the threats, and not by my family. Because this was bigger than all of us. This was about justice. And justice is the only family I have ever truly belonged to. The night after the preliminary hearing felt endless. I turned from side to side on my bed, sheets tangled around my legs, the image of my parents and Daniel sitting on the opposite side of the courtroom flashing again and again in my head. They did not have to say a word. The way they sat there, stiff and deliberate, told me everything. They were not just absent from my corner, they were present on the other side. And that hurt more than any stranger's opinion. By dawn, I gave up on sleep and sat at my kitchen table with cold coffee and case files spread across every inch of space. The city outside was waking up, horns blaring, people rushing to work. I felt like I was already in a fight before I even left my apartment. The case had exploded into headlines. Some outlets praised me for taking a stand, others painted me as reckless or naive. My inbox was flooded with hate mail. On social media, I was either a hero or a traitor. Maria came by that morning like she had a sixth sense for when I was breaking. She shoved a bag of bagels in my hands and forced me to eat. "You're no good to that boy if you starve yourself," she said. I smiled faintly. "You sound like my mother," she smirked. "Except your mother would never be caught dead eating a bagel with cream cheese. She'd probably call it uncivilized." That made me laugh harder than I expected. Maria had that effect on me. She could turn my darkest mornings into something bearable. We dug into the case together. Witness statements, timelines, police reports. The prosecution's main witness was Leonard Price, a man with a criminal record who suddenly turned into a star witness the moment he agreed to point the finger at Jamal. I knew a deal had been made. I had seen it too many times before. The problem was convincing a jury that the prosecution was willing to build a case on a liar. Jamal's alibi was his cousin, a soft-spoken kid who swore Jamal had been with him all night playing video games. The prosecution dismissed it as family covering for family. I needed to find something stronger. When I met with Jamal again, he looked worn down. Jail has a way of draining the light out of people, and he was only 22. He sat across from me with his hands folded, eyes tired, but still searching for some kind of hope. "Miss Collins," he said, his voice low, "do you think the jury will believe me?" I leaned forward. I can't control what they believe yet, but I can promise I'll make them see you. Not just a headline, not just a mugshot. You. For a moment, his eyes softened. You're the only one who talks to me like I matter. Those words stuck with me long after I left the jail. I mattered to him, even if I didn't matter to my own family. A few nights later, I was still in my office past midnight when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. A voice, distorted, mechanical. Drop the case, last warning. The line went dead. I sat there, staring at the phone in my hand, my pulse racing. For a second, I thought about calling the police, but I already knew what they'd say. They tell me to be careful, maybe file a report, then move on. They didn't care, and if anything, it would just paint a bigger target on me. So I slid the phone back in my pocket and whispered to myself, if they're scared enough to threaten me, then I must be onto something. The threats didn't stop me, but they added weight. Every time I walked to my car at night, I scanned the shadows. Every time I unlocked my apartment door, I held my breath. I told no one, not even Maria. Meanwhile, Daniel was busy playing Golden Sun on television. He appeared on a podcast talking about law and order, saying criminals were bleeding this city dry. My father gave interviews about protecting good families from the chaos of crime. My mother stayed silent, which was her favorite weapon. One night, Daniel called me directly. His voice dripped with condescension. You're still chasing this lost cause, huh? I clenched my jaw. What do you want, Daniel? I want you to stop dragging our name through the mud. You think anyone respects the Collins family when you're out there defending thugs? I'm defending an innocent man. You don't know that, and even if you did, innocence doesn't mean anything in this city. Winning does, money does, reputation does, that's how you survive. But you wouldn't know that because you're too busy playing martyr. I snapped, my voice shaking. And you wouldn't know justice if it was standing right in front of you. There was a pause. Then he said coldly, one day you'll regret choosing strangers over your own blood. And he hung up. I set the phone down slowly, my chest tight. The threats from outsiders scared me, but Daniel's words cut deeper. Because as much as I wanted to deny it, a part of me still wished my family could see me, really see me. The days before trial felt like a storm gathering. Protesters lined the courthouse steps every morning. Some held signs that said justice for Jamal, others screamed for his execution. The police were everywhere. The media camped outside like vultures. I learned to keep my head high and my eyes straight ahead. Inside, I worked myself to exhaustion. Maria stayed by my side, keeping me from drowning. Harris checked in but mostly left me to handle the case my way. Jamal's mother, Gloria, visited often. She prayed over me, clutching her Bible, tears in her eyes. God sent you, she kept saying. You're the angel we needed. I never felt less like an angel. I felt like a woman being torn apart from every direction, but I nodded and told her, I won't stop fighting. The night before jury selection, I stood at my window looking out at the city. The lights blurred in my vision. My reflection looked older, more tired than I remembered. I whispered, tomorrow it begins. And I knew that whatever happened in that courtroom, it was going to change me. It was going to change Jamal. And it was going to carve the final line between me and the family that once raised me. The first day of jury selection felt like stepping onto a stage with no script. The courtroom buzzed with tension before a single juror had even walked in. Reporters filled the back rows, their pens scratching, cameras flashing when they thought they could get away with it. The prosecutor, Thomas Green, sat across the aisle, his suit crisp, his smile smug. He was the kind of man who thought conviction rates were trophies. He didn't glance at me, not once. He wanted to pretend I wasn't even there. When the potential jurors filed in, I studied every face. Some looked bored, some looked nervous, some looked like they had already decided Jamal was guilty. I could see it in the way their eyes lingered on him, chained and silent beside me. The judge began the process, asking the standard questions. Do you know the defendant? Do you have any bias against law enforcement? Then it was my turn. I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and tried to meet their eyes one by one. Good morning, I said. My name is Sarah Collins, and I will be representing Jamal Turner. My job is not to trick you. My job is to make sure you see all of the evidence and hear all of the truth before you make a decision. All I ask is that you keep an open mind. Can anyone here promise me that? A few nodded. Some crossed their arms. One man in the front row muttered something under his breath about criminals always getting off easy. I marked him down immediately. It took 3 long days. 3 days of watching people squirm, watching others lie to get out of serving, watching Green smile every time someone admitted they trusted police officers completely. I fought for jurors who looked like they might see Jamal as human. Green fought for jurors who looked like they already wanted a conviction. By the end, We had 12. Not perfect, not close, but better than I expected. Jamal leaned toward me as the judge dismissed the room. "Do you think they'll listen?" he whispered. I whispered back, "I'll make sure they do." The next morning, the trial began. The air in that courtroom was heavy, like everyone was holding their breath. Green stood tall and confident as he delivered his opening statement. He painted Jamal as a violent criminal, a young man who chose greed over life. He described the victim as a beloved shop owner, a family man, a pillar of the community. He spoke like he was telling a bedtime story, each word carefully chosen to make Jamal look like a monster. When it was my turn, I walked slowly to the center of the courtroom. I let the silence stretch for a moment, forcing the jurors to look at me, to look at Jamal. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "you've just heard a story. But stories are not always true. My client is not a monster. He is a young man, 22 years old, who has been accused of something he did not do. The evidence will show that Jamal was not at that store. The evidence will show that the state's case is built on shaky witnesses and assumptions. And at the end of this trial, I believe you will see that the only just verdict is not guilty." I turned to Jamal. His eyes met mine. For the first time in days, he looked like he believed it might be possible. The prosecution called their first witness, Leonard Price. He swaggered up to the stand like he was walking into a bar, not a courtroom. Green asked him to tell the jury what he saw that night. "I saw him," Leonard said, pointing straight at Jamal. "I saw him running out of the store with a gun in his hand." The jurors shifted uncomfortably. Jamal sat stiff beside me. I waited, expression neutral, until Green finished. Then I stood. "Mr. Price," I said, "you've been arrested before, haven't you?" He squirmed. "That's not relevant. Just answer the question." "Yes." "How many times?" He looked at Green, then muttered, "A few." I held up a document. "In fact, you've been arrested over a dozen times. For theft, for burglary, for fraud. Isn't that right?" His face flushed red. "Maybe. And just 2 months ago you were facing a long sentence, weren't you?" Silence. "And suddenly, after you pointed the finger at Jamal, the charges against you disappeared. Did the prosecutor make you a deal?" The courtroom buzzed. The judge banged his gavel. "Order," Leonard stammered. "I just told the truth." I leaned closer. "Or did you tell the story they wanted to hear so you could walk free?" His eyes darted. The jurors noticed. I sat down slowly, satisfied. Jamal leaned over and whispered, "You destroyed him." I whispered back, "It's just the beginning." But the truth was, it was only a small crack in a wall built high against us. Green still had other witnesses. The store clerk who claimed to see Jamal days earlier. The officer who insisted the gun found nearby matched the description. It was flimsy, but it sounded strong when said with authority. Each day dragged into the next. Long hours in the courtroom, longer nights preparing for the next round. Maria stayed with me, carrying stacks of files, scribbling notes, whispering encouragement when I looked like I was about to collapse. The courthouse steps became a battlefield. Protesters chanted Jamal's name, while others shouted that I was the devil for defending him. Police lined the street. Reporters shoved microphones in my face. "Do you believe your client is innocent? Why do you risk your career on this?" I kept my answers short. "The evidence will speak." At night, the silence in my apartment pressed down on me. I wanted to hear my mother's voice, even if it was critical. I wanted my father to say he understood, even if he didn't. I wanted Daniel to look at me like a sister, not an enemy, but they were gone. Not physically gone, but gone where it mattered. One evening, after another grueling day, Maria caught me staring out the window. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That maybe they're right," I whispered. "Maybe I am throwing my life away on this." She came and stood beside me. "No, you're doing what nobody else has the guts to do. And one day, Sarah, when the truth comes out, everyone will know it." Her words carried me through the next morning when we walked back into that courtroom. Green smirked, the judge looked tired, the jurors looked wary. But I held my head high, because this was what I was born to do, even if it meant standing alone. Every morning when I stepped out of my apartment, I could feel the air thick with judgment. Reporters were camped outside my building, their cameras flashing the moment I appeared. I learned to keep walking, eyes forward, not giving them even a word. The courthouse was worse. On one side of the steps, protesters carried signs with Jamal's name, chanting for justice. On the other side, people screamed that I was defending a killer. Police stood between them, hands on their batons, as if a riot could spark at any second. Walking through that chaos became routine. My heels clicked on the courthouse steps, the noise rising on both sides like a storm. Inside, the air wasn't calmer. The courtroom itself was its own battlefield. Green ran his case like he was conducting an orchestra. He stood tall, voice smooth, words sharp. He laid out his witnesses one after another, each one meant to build a picture of Jamal as a violent young man. A store clerk testified that Jamal looked suspicious days before the crime. A police officer insisted the weapon found near the scene matched the type used in the shooting. Green's confidence filled the room. He looked at the jury like he already owned them. But when it was my turn, I attacked. "Officer Reynolds," I said, pacing slowly in front of the jury, "you testified that the weapon you found matched the description given by witnesses, correct?" "Yes, but you did not recover any fingerprints on the weapon? No, no DNA evidence? No, nothing that physically ties this gun to my client? Correct." I stopped pacing, letting the silence sit heavy. Then I leaned on the witness stand. "So what you're telling this jury is that in a city filled with discarded weapons, you found a gun near the scene and decided it belonged to Jamal because it looked like the one described. Nothing more." Reynolds shifted in his chair. "It's consistent with the witness testimony." "Consistent doesn't mean proof," I said softly, looking straight at the jury. "You're not here to convict on consistency. You're here to convict on facts, and there are no facts connecting this weapon to my client." The judge told the jury to disregard my last remark, but I could see it land. A few jurors avoided Green's eyes. When court adjourned that day, Jamal leaned over to me. "You tore him apart," he whispered. I gave him a small smile. "It's only the beginning." But the truth was, Green still had the advantage. He had the system. He had the reputation. He had the narrative. I was fighting uphill every second. That night, Maria found me slumped over my desk, surrounded by files and empty coffee cups. "You're killing yourself," she said, pulling the papers out of my hands. "I don't have a choice," I muttered. "If I don't stay ahead, Green will bury us." She leaned down, forcing me to look at her. "Sarah, listen to me. You can't fight this war alone. Let me take some of it. Let me go through the witness statements. Let me check their timelines, please." For a moment, I wanted to tell her no, that she shouldn't have to carry my battles, but the exhaustion in my bones won. I nodded slowly. "All right, just. Don't get lost in it like I am," she grinned. "Someone has to keep you alive." But keeping me alive was harder than either of us admitted, because the threats hadn't stopped. That same night, as I drove home from the office, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. Too close, too steady. I turned onto a side street. The car followed. My hands tightened on the wheel, heart pounding. I took another turn. Still there, I sped up, pulled into a crowded gas station, and finally the car veered away. I sat there gripping the wheel, breath ragged. It wasn't paranoia. Someone wanted me to feel hunted. When I got home, there was an envelope slipped under my door. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with one sentence typed in bold letters. "Drop the case or you're next." I sat at my kitchen table staring at the words, my stomach twisting. I thought about calling the police, but I already knew they wouldn't care. A defense lawyer being threatened was barely news to them. I folded the paper, shoved it into a drawer, and told myself fear couldn't stop me. The next day in court, I wore my fear like armor. I told myself if they wanted me scared, I would show them defiance instead. Green called another witness, a neighbor who claimed to have seen Jamal near the store the night of the crime. When it was my turn, I asked, "What time did you see him?" "About 9:30. I held up the police report. "But in your original statement, you said 10:15. Which is it?" The witness stammered. I might have mixed up the time. "Or maybe you were coached to change it to fit the prosecution's timeline?" Objection. Sustained. I backed off, but the damage was done. The jury had seen the cracks. Still, each small victory drained me more. At night, when the lights were off and silence filled the apartment, I lay awake wondering if the threats would escalate. I wondered if I'd wake to broken glass or worse. And I wondered how long I could hold myself together before the pressure shattered me. One night, my phone buzzed again with Daniel's name. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Still clinging to the circus?" he sneered. "What do you want, Daniel? To remind you that you're ruining everything. Mom won't even leave the house. Dad's furious. And our firm, our name, is being dragged through the mud because of you." I bit back anger. "This isn't about you. It's about an innocent man who could lose his life." He laughed coldly. "Innocent or not, nobody cares. People care about who wins, and you, Sarah, are not a winner." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. My hands shook as I set the phone down. The threats from strangers were terrifying, but my brother's contempt carved the deepest wounds. As the trial pushed forward, I held onto one truth. Jamal deserved someone who believed in him. If no one else in the world did, I would, even if it cost me everything. And as I walked back into that courtroom, I felt the line between me and my family growing wider, deeper, impossible to cross. By the second week of trial, exhaustion was etched into every bone in my body. I lived on coffee and adrenaline, barely tasting food, barely feeling the difference between day and night. The courtroom had become my entire world. Each morning, I walked through the courthouse doors like a soldier marching to battle. Protesters screamed, reporters shoved microphones at me, flashes from cameras blinded me. Inside, Green wore his smug confidence like armor, moving through his witnesses with precision. The judge grew impatient, the jury grew restless, and Jamal sat beside me, sinking deeper into silence. One afternoon, during a short recess, Jamal leaned toward me. His voice was quiet, broken. "They already think I'm guilty. I can see it in their faces." I shook my head firmly. "Don't say that. We're cracking their case. Did you see how the jury looked at Leonard when I exposed his deal? Did you see how they reacted when the officer admitted there were no prints on the gun?" He looked at me with tired eyes. "They don't care. I'm just another black kid to them. A thug who got caught. Doesn't matter what you prove." His words pierced me. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that justice would prevail if we fought hard enough. But I couldn't lie to him, not when I'd seen the same truth in jurors' eyes. Instead, I placed a hand on his arm and said, "Then I'll make them care. I'll make them see you." When court resumed, Green called another witness, a woman who lived near the store. She testified she had seen Jamal run down the street the night of the shooting. Her voice trembled as if rehearsed fear could pass for truth. When it was my turn, I approached calmly. "Mrs. Whitaker, how far is your window from the street?" "About 40 feet. And it was nighttime, correct?" "Yes." "Was the street well lit?" She hesitated. "Not very." I held up a photo. "This is the street in question. Would you agree there are only 2 working lamps on that entire block?" She squinted. "Yes. And yet from 40 feet away in poor lighting, you are certain it was my client you saw?" She shifted in her seat. "I think so." "You think so?" I repeated softly. "Or you're sure?" Her voice cracked. I can't be completely sure." I let the silence linger, then said, "No further questions." The jury stirred. Another crack, another doubt, but Jamal didn't smile. He just stared at the table, shoulders heavy. That night I stayed late at the office, papers scattered around me. Maria sat across from me, sipping cold coffee, her eyes filled with worry. "You're burning out," she said. "I don't have a choice." She leaned forward. "Sarah, listen to me. If you break, this case breaks. And then what happens to Jamal? You've got to take care of yourself too." I rubbed my temples. "I don't know how. I can't stop." "I stop, I think I'll fall apart." She reached across the desk and grabbed my hand. "Then lean on me. Let me carry some of it. You don't have to do this alone." I wanted to believe her, but deep inside I knew the weight would always fall on me. On the 3rd week, the trial hit its most brutal day yet. Green introduced surveillance footage. Grainy, blurred, but enough for him to spin his story. "There," he said, pointing at a figure running across the screen. "That's Jamal Turner fleeing the scene." The jurors leaned forward. I felt my stomach knot. When it was my turn, I stood slowly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this footage is unclear at best. The figure could be anyone. No facial features, no identifiable clothing, just a shadow in the dark. If this is the best proof the state has, then I suggest you ask yourselves why." The judge told the jury to disregard my commentary, but the seed was planted. Still, Green's theatrics landed. I could see it in the jurors' eyes. That night back at the jail, Jamal was furious. He slammed his hands on the table. "They don't care if it's blurry, they just see someone running and think it's me. I'm dead, Sarah, I'm already dead." I tried to steady him. "No, you're not dead, we're not done." He shook his head, tears brimming. "You don't get it, I'm black, poor, from the wrong side of town, that's all they see. Doesn't matter how many holes you punch in their case. Doesn't matter how much you fight. They already chose me as the villain." My throat tightened. "Then I'll tear down the whole damn story until they can't ignore the truth." He stared at me for a long time, then whispered, "Why do you care so much?" I blinked back my own tears. "Because no one cared for me when I needed it, and I swore I'd never let someone else feel that alone." Silence filled the room between us, heavy but honest. When I walked out of the jail that night, the sky was black and the air sharp. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from an unknown number. "You can't save him, and you can't save yourself." My stomach turned, but I forced my feet forward. Fear was a constant now, like a shadow that never left. And as the trial pressed on, I realized something chilling. This wasn't just about Jamal anymore. Someone out there was determined to silence me too. By the 4th week of trial, the weight of it all pressed on me like a stone I couldn't put down. My body moved through motions automatically. Wake up, drink coffee, dress in black suits that felt like armor, walk into the storm outside the courthouse, endure the cameras, the screams, the whispers. Inside, the courtroom had become a cage. I could feel the jury's exhaustion, the judge's impatience, the prosecution's smug confidence. Every day I told myself I would find the crack, the place where the truth would shine through. And every day Green tightened his grip on the narrative. He paraded new witnesses, an officer who insisted Jamal matched the description of the suspect, another neighbor who claimed she saw him near the store weeks earlier. Each time I tore into them, exposing contradictions, shaky memory bias, but it felt like patching holes in a sinking ship. Jamal was unraveling. During one recess, he leaned toward me, voice low and raw. "They're going to put me away. I can feel it. You can't save me." I turned to him sharply. "Don't say that. We're still in this." "You hear me? We're still in this." But he just stared at the table, lips pressed tight, shoulders heavy like the whole world was crushing him. At night, I sat in my office surrounded by papers, my head pounding. Maria sat across from me, flipping through files, muttering about holes in the prosecution's case. She tried to keep my spirits up, but even she was wearing down. "You're killing yourself, Sarah," she said one night, slamming a folder shut. "You're not eating, you're barely sleeping, you can't fight like this." "I don't have a choice," I muttered. "If I stop for even a second, Green wins, and Jamal loses everything." Maria leaned forward, her voice softening. "And what about you? What happens when you lose yourself in this?" I rubbed my temples, feeling tears sting the back of my eyes. Maybe losing myself is the price of justice. Her silence was heavy, full of worry she didn't want to speak aloud. The threats hadn't stopped either. Every few nights I found notes slipped under my door, words typed in block letters: drop the case or face the consequences. Sometimes it was a phone call in the middle of the night with nothing but breathing on the other end. Sometimes it was headlights in my rearview mirror following me too long. Fear became my constant companion, sitting beside me in silence. Still, I kept walking into that courtroom. One day, Green played the role of showman, pulling out a piece of evidence he'd been saving. A partial footprint found near the store. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, pacing before the jury, "this footprint matches the brand and size of shoes owned by the defendant, another piece of proof connecting him to the scene." I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't damning on its own, but it was something the jury could cling to. When it was my turn, I forced my voice steady. "Detective," I said, "you testified this footprint was found outside the store." "Yes." "And this store sits on a public street, does it not?" "Yes." "A street where dozens, maybe hundreds of people walk every day?" "Yes." "So this print could belong to anyone with that brand of shoes, correct?" He hesitated. "It's possible." "Possible?" I repeated softly. "Or probable? Do you know how many people in this city wear the same brand?" Green objected, the judge sustained, but the damage was done. Still, I knew the jury had seen enough to plant doubt both ways. That evening, when I returned to my apartment, I found another envelope on my floor. Inside was a photo. Me walking out of the courthouse, circled in red ink. No words this time, just the image. I sat down hard on my couch, the photo shaking in my hands. Whoever was doing this wasn't just watching me, they were close. Too close. I thought about calling my father, about telling him his daughter's life was being threatened, but I could already hear his response. "You brought this on yourself. You chose this path." I threw the photo into a drawer and poured myself a drink, trying to drown the terror with whiskey. The next day, Green called Jamal's cousin to the stand, the only person who had given Jamal an alibi. I felt sick watching him shuffle to the chair, his hands trembling. Green tore into him with practiced precision, painting him as a liar covering for family. By the time I stood to cross-examine, the damage was done. "Do you love your cousin?" I asked softly. "Yes," he whispered. "Would you lie for him?" His eyes darted, fear written all over his face. "No," I told the truth. I wanted to believe the jury heard the honesty in his voice, but I knew Green had already planted the seed of doubt. That night in the jail, Jamal snapped. He slammed his fist on the table. "It's over. They don't believe me. They don't believe him. Nobody believes anything except what Green feeds them." I grabbed his hand before the guards could react. "Look at me, I believe you. And I won't stop fighting, not until the last second." His eyes filled with tears. "Why do you care, Sarah? You don't even know me." I swallowed hard. "Because I know what it's like to be abandoned, to have no one in your corner, and I swore I would never let someone else feel that way if I could stop it." For the first time, he looked at me with something close to trust, maybe even hope. As the trial dragged on, I could feel myself unraveling. I woke in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, convinced someone was in my apartment. I jumped at every sound in the hallway. And yet, every morning, I put my suit back on and walked into the storm. One morning, as I entered the courtroom, I froze. Sitting in the back row was my mother. For a split second, I thought maybe she had come to support me. But when our eyes met, she looked away. She hadn't come for me. She had come to stand with the victim's family. My chest ached as I took my seat at the defense table. Jamal whispered, "Who is she?" My mother, I said, my voice cracking. He looked stunned. She's with them? I nodded, my throat too tight for words. And in that moment, I realized just how alone I truly was. But maybe being alone was what I needed. Because the fire inside me burned hotter than ever. If my own family chose to stand against me, then I would fight harder. I would show them and everyone else in that room that justice wasn't theirs to own. I looked at Jamal, then at Green, then at the jury. And I made a silent promise. This fight was far from over. The courtroom had begun to feel like a living organism, one that fed on my exhaustion, one that grew stronger every time I stumbled. By the fourth week, I no longer recognized my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Hollow eyes, pale skin, dark circles that even makeup couldn't cover. My suits hung a little looser on me, my hands shook when I poured coffee, but every morning I still walked into that courthouse, because I had no choice. Jamal had no one else. That day, the crowd outside was louder than usual. Protesters screamed so close to my face that spittle landed on my cheek. Cameras flashed in a blinding storm. Someone shouted, "Traitor!" Someone else screamed, "Hero!" The contradictions pressed against me until I could barely breathe. I pushed through, clutching my briefcase like it was the only solid thing left in my life. Inside, Green was already waiting. Perfect suit, perfect smile, perfect posture. He thrived on this. He loved the circus, loved the spotlight. The judge looked weary, the jury looked drained, but Green still carried himself like a man on stage. That morning, he called the victim's widow. She walked slowly to the stand, clutching a tissue in one trembling hand. Her grief filled the room before she even spoke. When she described the night her husband didn't come home, her voice cracked, and the jurors leaned forward, eyes soft with sympathy. She painted a picture of the man he had been: a husband, a father, a man who kissed his daughter's forehead every night. Green barely asked questions. He didn't need to. The image of her pain was enough. I sat at the defense table, my chest tight. I knew what he was doing. He was wrapping the jury in sorrow, drowning them in pity until they could no longer separate grief from guilt. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, my voice gentle. "Mrs. Thompson, I am deeply sorry for your loss. I cannot imagine the pain you and your family feel." Tears ran down her face as she nodded. I hesitated before continuing. "Do you know with your own eyes who pulled the trigger that night?" Her lips trembled. "No, but the police told me," I cut her off gently. "You weren't there. You don't know who did it." Her silence filled the room like thunder. I thanked her softly and returned to my seat. Jamal leaned toward me, his voice shaking. "They believe her, I can see it. They think I did it." I whispered back, "They don't know the truth yet. We'll make them see." But deep down, I felt the same dread. During recess, Jamal slumped in his chair. His hands shook. "I can't take much more of this. It's like they already decided." I leaned in close. "I know it feels that way, but every doubt I plant matters. Every time a witness cracks, it matters. We are not done." He stared at me, eyes hollow. "I don't trust them. I only trust you." Those words carried both hope and unbearable weight. That night, Maria found me in my office, head down on a pile of files. She shook me awake. "Sarah, you're destroying yourself. You can't keep this up." I rubbed my eyes. "I can't stop. If I stop, Jamal loses." Her voice cracked. "And if you keep going like this, you'll collapse in the middle of trial. Then he loses anyway." I wanted to argue, but the truth sat heavy in my bones. The next morning, I braced myself for another day of Green's performance. But when I looked up toward the benches, my heart froze. Daniel was sitting there, my brother, dressed in his immaculate navy suit, hair perfect, posture rigid. He sat in the back row with his arms crossed, his eyes locked on me. For a second, I thought maybe I was imagining it. Maybe the exhaustion was making me hallucinate. But no, he was there. My stomach twisted. He hadn't come once in all these weeks. Not to support me, not to speak to me, not to even pretend he cared. He had mocked me in interviews, called me reckless, a disgrace. And now he was here in my courtroom watching. I tried to focus on the proceedings. Green called another officer, parading him like another pawn in his performance, but I couldn't stop glancing at Daniel. Something was off. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't smug. He looked tense, like a man carrying something he didn't want to hold. The officer testified about procedure, about how Jamal was identified, about how the case had been built. I cross-examined, pulling at threads, forcing him to admit the lineup was rushed, that the lighting was poor, that the identification wasn't ironclad. But my mind wasn't fully in it. My mind kept drifting to the back row, to Daniel. When court adjourned, I was shoving files into my briefcase when I felt a hand on my arm. I spun around, ready to snap. Daniel stood there. "What the hell are you doing here?" I hissed. He glanced around, his jaw tight. "Not here, not now, we need to talk privately." I yanked my arm free. "After everything you've said, after siding with Mom and Dad while they sit with the victim's family, now you want to talk?" His eyes darted toward the jury filing out. His voice dropped. "This isn't about them. It's about something bigger, something you don't understand yet." My heart pounded. "What are you talking about?" He leaned closer, his voice low and sharp. "Be ready. I'll come forward when the time is right." Before I could answer, he turned and walked out, vanishing into the hallway with that same perfect posture. I stood frozen, clutching my files to my chest, my mind spinning. Daniel never did anything without an agenda. If he was here, if he was talking about something bigger, then he was involved in ways I hadn't seen. And that terrified me more than Green, more than the threats, more than the possibility of losing this trial. Because if Daniel was tied to this case, then the truth was connected to something darker, deeper, and far more dangerous than I had imagined. I left the courthouse that evening with my pulse racing, my briefcase heavy, and my heart torn between dread and curiosity. For weeks I had fought Green, the press, the system, and the threats that haunted me. But now I realized there was another enemy, closer than all the rest, my own brother, and I didn't know if he had come to save me or to bury me. The next morning, the courthouse was even more crowded than usual. Word had spread that the trial was reaching its peak, and the press was hungry for blood. Protesters pressed against barricades, police shouted for order, cameras flashed like lightning. I walked through it all with my head high, though inside my stomach churned. When I stepped into the courtroom, I scanned the benches instinctively. Daniel was there again. Same perfect suit, same rigid posture, but this time he didn't just watch me. He gave the slightest nod, almost imperceptible, like a signal only I was meant to see. My pulse quickened. The morning session dragged with more testimony from the prosecution. Green hammered home the same points. Shaky witnesses, a blurry video, circumstantial evidence polished until it looked like gold. The jurors leaned forward, some nodding, some frowning. Jamal sat stiff beside me, his hands clenched. Then it happened. Just before recess, Green announced confidently, "The prosecution rests." It was our turn. My heart pounded as I stood. The defense will begin presenting its case. I called Jamal's cousin first, reinforcing the alibi, even though Green had torn at him days earlier. The boy's voice cracked, but he stayed firm. I called a local shopkeeper who had seen Jamal elsewhere on the night in question, though Green tried to dismiss her as unreliable. Piece by piece, I laid a foundation, but I could feel the weight of doubt still hanging heavy in the room. And then the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Everyone turned. Daniel walked in, not to the benches this time, but straight down the aisle. My heart stopped. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm but strong, "I request permission to address the court as a witness." A murmur rippled through the room. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked. I stood frozen, my mind racing. The judge frowned. "State your name and relation to the case." "Daniel Collins," he said. "I am the brother of defense counsel Sarah Collins, and I have information relevant to this trial." Gasps echoed. My chest tightened like a vice. I turned to him, whispering sharply, "Daniel, what are you doing?" He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the judge. Permission was granted, and Daniel took the stand. His presence filled the room. He looked every bit the polished attorney from his powerful firm, the golden son of our family. But his voice carried weight that I hadn't heard before. "I am here today because I discovered documents within my firm," he began, that linked the prosecution's evidence to a broader cover-up. Specifically, a police officer involved in this case has been under investigation for manipulating evidence in multiple trials. And I have here a file. He held up a folder. That shows the same officer pushed the narrative against Mr. Turner while ignoring exonerating evidence. The courtroom erupted. Green jumped to his feet, shouting objections. The judge banged his gavel for order. I stared at Daniel, my mind spinning. What the hell was he doing? Why now? Why help? The judge allowed the file to be entered for review. Daniel spoke with calm precision, pointing out inconsistencies, showing how one officer's reports had shifted, how evidence had been lost. Piece by piece, he dismantled the credibility of the prosecution's case. For the first time, I saw the jury's eyes widen. For the first time, Green looked rattled. When Daniel stepped down, he finally looked at me. For just a second, his mask cracked, and I saw something sharp in his eyes. Not pride, not brotherly love, something else, something calculated. During recess, Jamal grabbed my arm. "Your brother just saved me. Did you know about that?" I shook my head slowly. "No, I didn't." Maria pulled me aside, her voice urgent. "Sarah, this doesn't add up. Why would Daniel suddenly appear with files from his firm? He's not doing this for Jamal. He's doing this for himself." I swallowed hard. She was right. Daniel never acted without protecting his own interests. If he brought evidence, it was because it served him somehow. But I couldn't deny what had just happened. The tide of the trial had shifted. The jury looked different. Jamal looked different. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered in his eyes. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know if my brother had come to help me or to trap me. The courtroom was electric after Daniel's testimony. The reporters practically stampeded out of the room the moment the judge adjourned, their voices overlapping as they shouted into microphones. Protesters outside grew louder, feeding on the chaos like fire catching wind. Green sat at his table with his jaw clenched, flipping through papers furiously, but I could see it in his eyes. Daniel had shaken him. Beside me, Jamal leaned closer, whispering with disbelief, "Sarah, did that really just happen? Your brother just saved me. He saved me." I forced a small smile for him, but my chest felt hollow. "It helps us, yes." He gripped my hand suddenly, tight. "No one ever shows up for me. No one. And your own brother walked in here for me. You don't know what that means." I wanted to tell him I knew exactly what it meant, that I had lived my whole life waiting for my family to show up for me, and they never did. And now that Daniel had, I didn't trust it for a second. When court dismissed, I hurried into the hallway, papers clutched in my arms. Daniel was waiting, leaning against the marble wall like he had been posing for a magazine cover. His tie was perfect, his posture relaxed, his eyes unreadable. I stormed over. "What the hell was that stunt?" he smirked. "You're welcome." I narrowed my eyes. "Don't play games with me. Why now? Why walk in here like some savior when all you've done for weeks is tear me down?" He glanced around at the crowd of reporters gathering at the far end of the hall, then leaned closer. His cologne was sharp, almost suffocating. "Not here. Too many ears. Just know this, you weren't going to win without me." My blood boiled. "This isn't about me, Daniel. It's about Jamal. And if you think I believe for one second that you suddenly care about justice..." He cut me off with a quiet laugh. "Justice? You still chase that word like it means something. I didn't do this for him, and I sure as hell didn't do it for you. I did it because I had to, remember that." I stared at him, my heart pounding. "Had to? What does that mean?" He straightened, his mask snapping back into place. "You'll see. But take my advice, Sarah. Don't dig too deep. Sometimes the truth isn't a treasure. Sometimes it's a bomb." Then he walked away, shoulders squared, leaving me shaking with rage and confusion. That night, Maria showed up at my apartment unannounced, carrying Thai food and 2 bottles of beer. She dropped them on the table, studying my face as I paced the room. "You've been chewing the inside of your cheek for 20 minutes. Talk." I stopped pacing, my voice tight. "He's hiding something. I know it. He didn't bring that evidence to help Jamal. He did it to protect himself." Maria sat on the couch, cracking open a beer. "Of course he did. Your brother breathes self-interest. The question is, from what?" I sank into the armchair opposite her, burying my face in my hands. "If I start digging, I might find something that destroys him, maybe even Mom and Dad too. And if I don't, then I'm complicit. I'll win Jamal's case on a lie." She leaned forward, her eyes hard. "You need to decide what you care about more, family name or actual justice." Her words stung because I already knew the answer. After she left, I pulled out my laptop. Hours bled into the night as I dug through every public record I could find, following the trail Daniel had carelessly opened. Contracts between his firm and the police department. Budgets. Payments. At first, everything looked pristine, polished the way his firm always looked. But then I saw it, numbers that didn't add up, projects that existed only on paper, invoices signed off by the same officer Daniel had exposed in court. My stomach turned. This wasn't just one corrupt cop. This was a system, a partnership. The police department feeding Daniel's firm dirty money through ghost projects. And if that officer fell, the chain could lead straight back to Daniel, maybe even to my father. I sat back, my hands trembling. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The truth wasn't just dangerous, it was nuclear. Maria called me just before midnight. Her voice was sharp with worry. "You're still digging, aren't you?" I hesitated. "I found something." Silence, then, "Sarah, how bad?" I swallowed hard. "Bad enough to burn down everything. Bad enough that Daniel would rather twist this trial into a circus than let the real story come out." She exhaled slowly. "Then you've got a choice to make." I closed my eyes, Daniel's words replaying in my head. "Don't dig too deep. Sometimes the truth is a bomb." I whispered into the phone, "Maybe that's exactly why I have to." The next morning, I walked into the courthouse with my head high, but inside I was crumbling. The jury now saw Jamal differently. The tide was turning. For the first time in weeks, victory was within reach. But I couldn't shake the image of those contracts, those numbers, those forged signatures. I couldn't shake the realization that Daniel hadn't come to save anyone. He had come to bury the truth before it buried him. As I sat down at the defense table, Jamal whispered, "We're winning, right? Tell me we're winning." I forced a smile I didn't feel. "We're closer than ever." But deep inside, I knew the real battle wasn't just in this courtroom anymore. The real battle was deciding what to do with the truth about my brother. That night, I couldn't sleep. My apartment felt smaller than ever, the silence pressing against my chest like a weight. I sat at my kitchen table with the laptop open, scrolling through document after document until my eyes blurred. Every click pulled me deeper into a labyrinth I wasn't sure I could escape. The numbers were there, plain as day once you knew where to look. Payments disguised as consulting fees. Projects with no record of existence. Construction contracts billed for millions, but no evidence a single brick was laid. And always, somewhere on the approval line, a name I recognized. Either from Daniel's firm or from officers tied to the department. It wasn't just sloppy bookkeeping, it was organized theft. And worse, it was deliberate manipulation of cases. If a trial threatened the wrong person, evidence went missing. If a case could be spun to their advantage, witnesses suddenly appeared. The officer Daniel exposed wasn't a rogue. He was a cog in a machine. I leaned back, pressing my palms into my eyes, whispering to myself, "Jesus, Daniel, what the hell are you mixed up in?" I thought of Jamal, sitting in that cell, waiting on me to save him, believing for the first time that maybe the system might not crush him. If I used Daniel's file, Jamal could walk free. But if I exposed the rest, I would set fire to everything. My family's name, my brother's career, the fragile thread of hope Jamal clung to. And then what? Would justice still mean anything if it destroyed everyone in its path? My phone buzzed, pulling me out of the spiral. A text from an unknown number. "Stop digging, last warning." My stomach dropped. I glanced at my window, half expecting to see someone watching. The curtains were closed, but I felt exposed all the same. I deleted the text, but the words burned into my brain. The next morning, Maria met me outside the courthouse. She shoved a coffee into my hand, her eyes scanning my face. "You look like hell." "Thanks," I muttered. "You find something, didn't you?" I hesitated, then nodded. "It's bigger than I thought. Daniel's firm. They've been laundering money through police contracts, and the copy exposed, he was part of it. They're using cases like Jamal to cover their tracks." Her eyes widened. "Holy shit. Sarah, that's dangerous. You can't take this on alone." I shook my head. "I don't have a choice. If I ignore it, I'm complicit. If I expose it, I'll be declaring war on my own brother." Maria grabbed my arm, her voice sharp. "Then you need to decide what you are first, his sister or a lawyer chasing the truth." Before I could answer, the courthouse doors opened and the crowd swallowed us whole. Inside, the trial pressed on. The defense was stronger now, bolstered by Daniel's testimony, but Green wasn't backing down. He attacked every witness I brought, twisting their words, planting doubt. The jury was caught in the middle, swaying like reeds in the wind. At lunch recess, I saw Daniel waiting again, leaning against the wall with that same infuriating calm. I marched over, my voice low. "I know what you're hiding." His smile didn't falter. "Do you? You didn't save Jamal, you saved yourself. Your firm is knee-deep in corruption and you're cutting loose one cop to protect the whole machine." For a moment, the mask slipped. His jaw tightened. Then he leaned in, his voice icy. "Be careful, Sarah. You think you've uncovered something new, but you don't understand how deep this goes. You open your mouth, you won't just destroy me, you'll destroy yourself too." I stared at him, rage boiling. "Then maybe that's what justice looks like." He chuckled darkly. "Justice? No, that's suicide." He walked away, leaving me shaking in the middle of the hallway. That evening, I stopped at the jail to see Jamal. He looked better than he had in weeks, hope flickering in his eyes. "We're winning, right? Tell me we're winning." I forced a smile. "We've made progress." He leaned closer, his voice urgent. "If I get out of here, I'll owe you my life." "Why are you doing this for me? Really?" I swallowed hard. "Because I believe you, because everyone else gave up and I won't." His eyes glistened, and for the first time I saw something beyond fear. Gratitude. But when I left the jail, the hope on his face only deepened my dread, because I knew the ground I was standing on wasn't solid. It was cracking beneath me. When I got home, there was another envelope on my floor. Inside was a photo of me sitting in my office, head bent over papers, taken through the window. On the back, in red ink, "You were warned." My hands shook so badly I dropped the photo. For a long time I just sat on the floor, staring at it. Someone was close, watching me, following me, and if I kept pushing, they wouldn't just threaten. They would act. I poured a glass of water and tried to steady my breathing. I whispered to myself, "You wanted the truth, Sarah, now you have it. What are you going to do with it?" The next morning, when I walked into the courtroom, the jury looked different. Sharper, more attentive. Daniel's testimony had rattled the foundation of Green's case, but I couldn't celebrate, because I knew something Green didn't. something the jury didn't. The trial was no longer just about Jamal. It was about my brother. It was about me. And soon, I was going to have to decide whether I would bury the truth to protect my family or detonate the bomb and let it take us all down. The morning of the 11th day in court felt heavier than all the others before it. I woke before dawn, my body drenched in sweat, the photo from the night before still sitting on my table. The red circle drawn around me haunted my vision every time I closed my eyes. Someone had been inside my building, close enough to photograph me in my own space. I wanted to call the police, but I already knew what would happen. They would dismiss it as paranoia, or worse, they would feed the information straight back to whoever was behind the threats. I was trapped in silence. I drank coffee I couldn't taste, dressed in another dark suit, and drove downtown with my jaw locked. The city blurred by outside my window, but all I could think was, today might be the day it all breaks. The courthouse steps were packed again, the noise deafening. Protesters waved signs, some shouting for Jamal's freedom, others calling for his execution. My name was shouted too, tossed into the storm like both a curse and a prayer. Sarah Collins the saint. Sarah Collins the traitor. Sarah Collins the disgrace. Inside, the courtroom felt like a theater moments before curtain. Reporters crammed into the back rows. The jury looked tired but alert. Green sat rigid at his table, a storm brewing behind his eyes. Daniel was there too, polished as always, sitting quietly in the back row. Our parents sat near the victim's family, their faces stone. My father's jaw was set so tightly it looked like it might shatter. My mother refused to look at me. The gavel came down. Defense, call your next witness. I stood, my legs steady only because I forced them to be. The defense calls Officer Martinez. Gasps rippled through the room. This was the officer Daniel had implicated. I had fought for days to get him on the stand, and now he was here. His presence was radioactive. He walked to the witness chair, his face pale, sweat shining on his forehead. He swore the oath, his voice barely audible. I stepped closer, papers in hand. Officer Martinez, you've been with the department how many years? 15, he muttered. And in that time, how many cases have you testified in? Dozens. Dozens, I repeated, my voice calm. And yet in this case, your reports were inconsistent. Can you explain why evidence that should have cleared Mr. Turner disappeared from your files? He shifted uncomfortably. I don't recall. I slid a document onto the stand. Then maybe this will help. This is your signature on a report filed 6 months ago, is it not? He squinted, swallowed, and nodded. Yes. And yet here, the same report filed a week later is missing key details. The description of the suspect no longer mentions dreadlocks. The timeline is changed. Do you deny altering this report? I followed orders, he blurted out. The room exploded. Reporters scribbled furiously. Jurors whispered. Green shot to his feet with an objection that the judge silenced with a bang of his gavel. I leaned in, my voice sharp. Orders from whom, officer? Martinez's hands shook. He looked at the judge, then at Green, then, God help me, at Daniel. His eyes flicked toward my brother for just a fraction of a second, then he shook his head. I can't say. The judge pressed him to answer, but Martinez invoked his right to remain silent. The jury had seen enough. They had seen the fear. They had seen the cracks. And they had seen Daniel's shadow in it all, even if they didn't know what it meant. When recess was called, I collapsed into my chair. Maria leaned in, her whisper urgent. That was huge. You just blew a hole through Green's case. I nodded slowly, but my eyes were fixed on Daniel. He wasn't rattled. He wasn't scared. He sat perfectly still, his face a mask, but I knew he had felt Martinez's gaze. As I gathered my files, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to see my father standing there. His voice was low, furious. Stop this, Sarah. You're dragging our family through the mud. Do you understand what you're doing? I stared at him, my throat tight. I'm defending an innocent man. You're destroying us, he hissed. If you keep going, you'll regret it. Before I could answer, he turned and walked out, my mother trailing behind him. My chest ached so badly I could barely breathe. That night, I sat in my office with Maria, files spread everywhere. She pointed to the contracts I had uncovered, her face pale. This is it, Sarah. This is the smoking gun. Your brother's firm is in this up to their necks. If you drop it in court, the whole machine will come down. I rubbed my temples, exhaustion clawing at me. If I drop it in court, Jamal goes free, but so does Daniel. He'll bury the rest. If I expose everything, I might lose the trial, but I'll take him with it. Maria leaned forward, her voice fierce. Then what do you care about more, saving Jamal or saving justice? Her words cut me open, because I wanted both. God, I wanted both. Later, alone in my apartment, I poured a glass of whiskey and stared at the city lights outside my window. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. You have one chance. Stay silent. I smashed the phone onto the couch, tears burning my eyes. At 3 in the morning, I dreamed of Jamal's face. His eyes wide with hope, his voice whispering, "You're the only one who believes me." Then the dream shifted, and it was Daniel's face instead, his voice hissing, "Don't dig too deep." I woke with my heart pounding, my body shaking. By the time I walked into the courtroom again, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. The jury was watching closely now. Green was desperate, throwing everything he could to patch the sinking ship of his case. Jamal sat straighter, hope flickering again. Daniel's eyes never left me. When it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly. My hands shook, but my voice was steady. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," I began, "what you have seen over these past days is not just the trial of Jamal Turner. What you have seen is a system cracking under its own corruption. Evidence altered, reports rewritten, orders given to bury the truth, and a young man's life nearly stolen because of it." I paused, my eyes locking with Daniel. "You must ask yourselves, if it can happen to him, who else can it happen to? Who else has been swallowed by a machine that values reputation over justice?" The jury was riveted. Green sputtered objections, the judge overruled them. I ended with Jamal's name heavy on my tongue. "Do not let this man become another victim of that machine. Do not let the truth be buried." When I sat down, Jamal squeezed my hand, tears streaming down his face. "You saved me," he whispered, but my heart was heavy because I knew the verdict wasn't the end. Even if Jamal walked free, Daniel's shadow loomed large. And soon, I would have to decide whether to pull the trigger on the bomb of truth I held in my hands or let it destroy me in silence. The day of closing arguments felt like the air itself was waiting to crack. I barely slept the night before. My mind had been replaying every moment of the trial, every word Daniel had said, every threat whispered in the dark. By morning, I felt hollow, my body moving on pure willpower. The courthouse was more crowded than I had ever seen it. Every news station had a crew outside. Protesters filled the steps, their chants colliding into a storm. Police struggled to hold the line. It felt less like a trial and more like the prelude to a riot. Inside, the jury sat tense, their faces drawn with exhaustion. Green was already at his table, papers stacked neatly, his tie perfect, though his eyes betrayed the storm beneath. Jamal sat beside me, his leg bouncing, his face pale but determined. Daniel was in the back again. My parents, too. My mother's lips pressed tight, my father's glare burning a hole in me. The judge called the court to order. "Prosecution, your closing argument." Green rose, his voice smooth, confident. He painted the picture he had been painting from the beginning. A grieving widow, a life stolen, a suspect with motive and opportunity. He waved away contradictions as misunderstandings, painted every defense witness as unreliable. He leaned hard on emotion. "Do not let a dangerous man walk free," he implored. "Do not betray the memory of the victim." The jury nodded along in places, frowning in others. He sat down with a satisfied look, though sweat dotted his temple. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, the weight of the room pressing down on me. I took a deep breath, then stepped into the well of the courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady, "we have heard a lot in this trial. We have heard grief, anger, accusations. But grief is not evidence. Anger is not proof, and accusations are not truth." I let the words sink in. "You heard from Officer Martinez himself. He admitted that reports were altered under orders. You saw documents that changed, details erased. You saw how quickly the system pointed to Jamal Turner, not because of evidence, but because it was easy, because it was convenient." I turned to the jury, my voice rising. "This case is not about convenience. It is about justice. If the system can bend the truth against him, it can bend it against anyone. And if you let that stand, no one is safe." Jamal's eyes filled with tears as I looked back at him. "Do not let them take his life to protect their lies. Give him back his freedom." I sat down, my hands trembling. The judge dismissed the jury to deliberate. Hours passed. The courthouse buzzed with tension. Reporters filed constant updates. Jamal sat silent, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. Maria paced. I stared at the wall, my mind spinning between hope and dread. Finally, the jury returned. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear. The foreperson stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Jamal Turner." Time slowed. I saw Jamal's mother clutch her hands in prayer. Green's jaw set, Daniel's eyes fixed on me. "Not guilty." The courtroom erupted. Cheers, shouts, sobs. Jamal collapsed into his chair, tears streaming down his face. His mother wailed, rushing forward to embrace him. Maria hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs would crack, but I sat frozen, because even in victory I felt no relief. Across the room, Green stormed out, fury radiating off him. Reporters surged forward, and Daniel stood, adjusted his suit, and slipped out quietly, his face calm. Too calm. Jamal pulled me into a hug, his voice breaking. "You did it, Sarah. You saved me. You saved me." I hugged him back, whispering, "You saved yourself. I only showed them the truth." But inside, I knew I hadn't shown all of it. Not yet. Later, outside the courthouse, the chaos was overwhelming. Cameras shoved into my face, questions fired from every direction. "How do you feel about the verdict? What do you say to the victim's family? What about your brother's involvement?" I forced my way through the crowd, Maria shielding me as best she could. My car felt like a sanctuary when I finally closed the door, the noise muffled. My phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "We need to talk, alone, tonight." I stared at the screen, my stomach sinking, because I knew this wasn't over. Jamal was free, but Daniel's shadow loomed larger than ever. And soon I would have to choose, protect my family's name or detonate the truth that could destroy us all. And I had no idea which choice would cost me more. That night, the city felt alive in a way that made my skin crawl. News vans lined the streets, their satellite dishes blinking against the skyline. Crowds still lingered outside the courthouse, chanting, celebrating, or mourning depending on which side they had chosen. But I wasn't celebrating. I drove aimlessly for nearly an hour before finally pulling up to the address Daniel had sent. A private club downtown, all glass and stone, the kind of place only people like him could afford to belong to. I almost turned around twice, but something inside me knew I couldn't keep running. The doorman waved me through as if I were expected. Inside, the club was dim, polished, filled with quiet murmurs and the clink of glasses. Daniel was waiting in a corner booth, perfectly at ease, nursing a scotch like this was just another Thursday night. He smiled when he saw me. "Congratulations, big sister, you pulled it off." I slid into the booth across from him, my jaw tight. "You mean you pulled it off?" His smile widened, cold and amused. "Semantics." I leaned forward, my voice sharp. "Why, Daniel? Why step in? You've done nothing but try to humiliate me for years, and then suddenly you're the hero. What's your angle?" He sipped his drink before answering. "You really want the truth? Fine, my firm was exposed. Martinez was sloppy. He was going to bring the whole thing down, and if that happened, the fallout would have hit me. Hard. So I cut him loose, dropped him in your lap, and made you the shining crusader. You get your win. I get to bury the rest. Everybody wins." My stomach churned. Everybody. "You call that justice?" He shrugged. "Justice is a fairy tale, Sarah. Power is the only reality. You should know that by now." I clenched my fists under the table. "So Jamal's freedom was just collateral damage in your cover-up." "Collateral victory," he corrected smoothly. "You should thank me. Without me, you would have lost, and Jamal would be rotting in a cell." I shook my head, disgusted. "You're unbelievable. You manipulated evidence, Daniel. You tampered with the truth. And you expect me to stay silent?" His smile faded, his eyes darkening. "I expect you to be smart, because if you open your mouth, you won't just ruin me. You'll ruin Mom and Dad, too. Do you think those contracts got signed without their blessing? You think our family name is clean?" His words hit like a punch. I stared at him, my heart racing. "You're lying." He leaned closer, his voice low, dangerous. "Am I? Go ahead, dig deeper. You'll find our father's signature on half those deals. Mother's connections grease the rest. This isn't just about me, Sarah, it's about all of us." I sat back, my whole body shaking. Daniel watched me with a predator's calm. "So here's your choice. You can keep playing the righteous crusader and burn your entire family to the ground, or you can take the win, let Jamal live his life, and keep your mouth shut. Nobody gets hurt, except maybe your pride." Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Finally, I whispered, "Do you even hear yourself? You're asking me to become part of the very machine I've been fighting against." He smiled again, cold and sharp. "I'm not asking. I'm telling you how the world works, and you can either accept it or let it destroy you." I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. "You're wrong, Daniel. The world only works that way because people like you make it so, and I won't be part of it." His jaw tightened, but he didn't move. "Careful, Sarah. You've won one battle. Don't start a war you can't finish." I turned and walked out, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Outside, the city buzzed with lights and noise, but all I could hear was Daniel's voice in my head. Mom and Dad are in it too. If he was telling the truth, exposing him would mean tearing apart everything. Not just my brother, not just my parents, my entire family's legacy. And maybe that was exactly what justice required. But was I strong enough to pay that price? I stood on the sidewalk, staring up at the sky, and whispered to myself, "What do I do now?" No answer came. Just the city, alive and merciless, waiting for me to choose. I barely recognized myself in the mirror that morning. My eyes were red, my face pale, and the exhaustion ran so deep I could feel it in my bones. I kept hearing Daniel's words in my head, circling like a vulture. Mom and Dad are in it too. For hours I told myself it was another one of his manipulations. He knew exactly which buttons to push, which wounds to reopen. Maybe he was lying. Maybe he wanted me paralyzed with doubt. But the part of me that had spent 39 years watching my parents operate in the world, watching them choose reputation over truth again and again, knew better. So I did what I always do. I looked for the evidence. I spent the entire day in my office, laptop open, files scattered across my desk. I pulled every record I could find, digging through archives and public databases. At first it was clean, almost too clean. Perfect contracts, perfect language, the kind of paperwork that only someone very skilled would know how to polish. But then I started to see the patterns. Shell companies with meaningless names receiving city contracts, payments disguised as consulting fees, donations to campaigns that aligned a little too perfectly with favorable decisions in court. And then I saw it. A document buried in an old record, scanned poorly, the ink faded, but the signature was clear. My father's name at the bottom of a contract approving a project that never happened. Millions of dollars on paper, nothing built in reality. My stomach turned as I stared at the page. It was true. Daniel had not lied. I sat there for a long time, my hands shaking, whispering to myself like saying the words out loud might make them less real. They knew. They were part of it. All this time, while I was breaking myself apart trying to defend people like Jamal, my parents had been feeding the very system I was fighting. By nightfall, I could not sit still anymore. I grabbed the folder, stuffed the copies into it, and drove. The streets blurred past my window as I headed toward the house I had grown up in, the place that had always smelled like leather and old books and power. I parked in the driveway and just sat there for nearly 10 minutes. The house glowed warm from the inside, a picture of safety and family. I almost convinced myself to leave, to pretend I had not seen what I had seen. But then I remembered Jamal's face when the verdict came down, the tears in his eyes when he realized he was free. I remembered the photo slipped under my door, the circle drawn around me like a target. Silence was no longer an option. I knocked. My mother opened the door. She froze when she saw me. Her face softened for just a moment, like she wanted to embrace me, but then the mask returned. Her voice was careful, almost brittle. "Sarah." I stepped inside without asking. The living room looked exactly as it always had. The fire glowed in the hearth, the leather chairs polished to a shine, the shelves lined with legal journals and trophies. My father was there, sitting with a glass of brandy in his hand, the television playing a news recap of the trial. A clip of Jamal hugging his mother filled the screen. My father turned the TV off and looked at me with a glare that could have cracked stone. "You should not be here." I held up the folder, my hands trembling. "We need to talk." My mother closed the door behind me and said softly, "Sarah, this is not the time." "There will never be a right time," I snapped. My voice shook with anger I could not control. I know about the contracts, about the payments, about the projects that never existed." The silence that followed was suffocating. My father did not even blink. He set his glass down on the table with calm precision and leaned back in his chair. "You should have left it alone," he said. The words cut through me like ice. I felt my throat tighten. "So it is true, you signed those deals, you took the money." He stared at me, his face unreadable. "That is how the system works. You think justice is clean? You think anyone in this city rises without compromise? You are a child if you believe that." My mother's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded faintly. Her voice cracked. "We did it to protect the family, to protect you, to protect all of us." I turned on her, my voice trembling with fury. "Protect us? Do you even hear yourself? You let innocent people suffer so you could build a shield of money and power around our name. You let the system destroy lives so you could sit here drinking brandy and pretending you are honorable." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she said nothing. My father rose suddenly, his face red, his voice sharp. "You think you are better than us. You stand in a courtroom and play savior while we are the ones who keep the world from eating you alive. You want the truth, Sarah. Without us you would not have lasted a year. Every door that opened for you, we opened. Every chance you had to prove yourself, we made sure you had it. And now you stand here and judge us?" I felt the heat rise in my chest, the rage mixing with grief. "Do not twist this into some story about sacrifice. You were not protecting me. You were protecting yourselves, your reputation, your money, your empire. And Daniel is just like you. Now I know why." My father's eyes flashed. "Be careful. You have no idea the forces you are playing with. If you drag this into the light, it will not just destroy us. It will destroy you. Everything you have built will burn." My hands shook, but I forced the words out. "Maybe ashes are better than a lie." His voice thundered. "Leave, before you do something you cannot take back." My mother reached for me, her hand trembling. "Sarah, please do not do this." I looked at her, tears burning my eyes. "I already did, the day I chose to believe Jamal. The day I chose justice over convenience. I cannot unsee what you have done, and I will not stay silent." She crumpled into a chair, sobbing quietly. My father stood tall, unmoving, his eyes locked on me with fury and something else I could not name. Fear, maybe? I turned and walked out, the slam of the door behind me echoing in my chest like a gunshot. Driving home, I could barely see the road through my tears. The house that had once been a place of safety was now nothing but a shell built on lies. My parents were not just indifferent to justice. They were the rot at its core. And now I carried the truth in my hands, a truth that could tear everything down. I whispered into the silence of the car, my voice raw. "What do I do now?" The city lights blurred past, cold and merciless. There was no answer, only the weight of the choice pressing down on me. I barely slept after leaving my parents' house. The drive back to my apartment had felt endless, every shadow on the road like a figure waiting to step out in front of me. When I finally stumbled inside, I sat on the couch with the folder still in my hands, too wired to sleep, too drained to move. Morning came like a slap. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages from reporters, from colleagues, even from strangers online. Some praised me for defending Jamal, calling me a warrior for justice. Others spat venom, saying I had freed a killer and shamed my family name. I ignored them all. None of it mattered. What mattered was the folder on my coffee table and the fact that my family's fingerprints were all over it. By mid-morning, Maria arrived. She let herself in, holding 2 cups of coffee. She looked at me with concern, as if she already knew what I had uncovered. "You saw them, didn't you?" she said softly. I nodded, my voice hoarse. "I confronted them, they did not even deny it." She sat beside me, pressing the coffee into my hands. "So it is true." "It is worse than I imagined," I whispered. "They were never bystanders, they were players. They signed the contracts, took the money, protected Daniel, and now they expect me to stay quiet to carry their shame for them." Maria's face hardened. "And what are you going to do?" I stared at the folder, my hands trembling. "I don't know. If I go public, it destroys them. It destroys everything we ever were as a family. And if I stay quiet, I become part of the same machine I have been fighting." Maria grabbed my hand, her voice steady. "You have to decide what kind of lawyer you want to be, what kind of woman you want to be." Before I could answer, a knock rattled the door. Hard, deliberate, I froze. Maria's eyes flicked to mine. "You expecting someone?" I shook my head. The knock came again, louder this time. I walked slowly to the door, my pulse racing. Through the peephole, I saw 2 men in suits standing too stiffly, their faces blank. I opened it a crack. "Can I help you?" One of them smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Ms. Collins, we would like to ask you a few questions. May we come in?" "Who are you with?" I asked. "Concerned parties," he said smoothly. Maria appeared behind me, whispering in my ear. "Do not let them in." I tightened my grip on the door. "If you have questions, you can call my office. I am not answering anything here." The man's smile widened just enough to chill me. "Be careful, Ms. Collins. Curiosity has consequences." He slipped an envelope through the crack in the door, and the 2 of them walked away without another word. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A photograph of me leaving my parents' house last night, a red X drawn across it. Maria swore under her breath. "Jesus Christ, Sarah, they are watching you. This is a warning." I sank onto the couch, the photo trembling in my hands. "They want me to shut up." "They are not just warning you," Maria said, her voice sharp with fear. "They are telling you they can get to you, anywhere, anytime." We sat in silence, the weight of it pressing down on us. That evening, I tried to focus on work, but my nerves were shot. Every sound in the hallway made me flinch. Every car outside made me jump. I locked every window, double-checked every door. Around midnight, as I was going through more files, the lights in my apartment flickered. For a moment, the room went dark. My heart leapt into my throat. Then the power returned, steady but mocking, as if someone had flicked the switch just to remind me they could. I called Maria, my voice shaking. "I think someone is in the building." "I am coming over," she said instantly. By the time she arrived, nothing else had happened, but I could not shake the feeling that I was being hunted. Maria sat me down. "Listen to me. They are trying to scare you. They want you off balance so you will make mistakes. You have to decide right now, are you going to keep digging or are you going to walk away?" I stared at her, tears stinging my eyes. "If I walk away, I betray everything I stand for. If I keep digging, I put my life on the line." She squeezed my hand. "Then you better figure out how much your truth is worth." The next morning, I met Jamal at the community center where his mother had invited me. The place was buzzing with life, kids running through the halls, people stopping to hug him, to thank me. Jamal looked lighter, almost unrecognizable from the broken man who had sat beside me in court. He pulled me aside. I know it was not easy, what you did. I know you put yourself out there for me. I do not know how to thank you. I smiled faintly. Live your life, that is thanks enough. Then his voice dropped. I heard whispers, Sarah, about your family, people saying your brother was not just helping me, he was helping himself. Is that true? I froze. Why are you asking me that? Because I do not want you to carry a weight for me that is not yours to carry, he said quietly. You gave me my freedom, but do not lose yours in the process. His words stayed with me as I drove away. He was right. This was not just about Jamal anymore. It was about the truth I now held in my hands, the truth that could break my family and possibly break me too. When I returned home, another envelope waited at my door. Inside was a single sentence typed in black ink. This is your last chance. My breath caught, my heart racing. They were not bluffing anymore. The storm I had stepped into was about to break wide open. And I knew I had to choose, silence or fire. I barely remember how I got through that first night after the second envelope arrived. My apartment felt like a cage, every creak in the floorboards a threat, every shadow on the wall a warning. I sat with the lights on, clutching the folder against my chest like it was both my weapon and my curse. Sleep never came. Only silence, thick and unrelenting. When the sun finally rose, it poured weak light across my living room. I was still in the same clothes, still on the same couch, my eyes raw from tears I hadn't even realized had fallen. Maria showed up not long after. She didn't knock this time, just walked in with her spare key, holding a bag of groceries and her determined expression. Sarah, she said softly, you look like you've been through hell. I gave a broken laugh. Hell would be a vacation compared to this. She set the groceries on the counter and sat across from me. Talk, all of it. So I told her. About Daniel, about the confrontation with my parents, about the contracts, the payments, the evidence that tied them all together. I even told her about the men at my door, about the envelope with the red X across my picture. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking. Maria listened without interrupting, her face pale but steady. When I finally stopped, she reached across the table and grabbed my hand. So what are you going to do? I stared at her, tears stinging my eyes. If I speak, I burn them. Not just Daniel, but my parents too. Everything they built, everything our family name has ever meant, it will go up in flames. And if I stay quiet, then I am no better than them. I become part of the same corruption I've spent my life fighting. Maria squeezed my hand tighter. Sarah, you have always been the one who runs toward the fire when everyone else runs away. You already know your answer. You just don't want to say it out loud. Her words landed like a stone in my chest. That afternoon, I left my apartment with the folder tucked under my arm. I drove aimlessly at first, the city moving around me in a blur. At every stoplight, I thought about turning back, about shredding the papers, about letting silence swallow me whole. But every time I saw Jamal's face in my mind. The way he had looked at me in court, eyes wide with hope. The way he had whispered, "You're the only one who believes me." So I kept driving until I found myself at the waterfront. I parked and walked to the pier, the wood creaking under my feet, the water black and endless beneath me. The wind whipped hair into my face, stung my eyes, and still I stood there clutching the folder, whispering to myself, "What do I do? What do I do?" The water didn't answer. The city behind me didn't answer, but somewhere deep inside, I felt the truth rising. By the time I got back to my car, my choice was made. The next morning, I called Claire, a journalist I had trusted for years. She was sharp, relentless, and unafraid of power. We met in a quiet coffee shop far from downtown, the kind of place where nobody would bother us. She slid into the booth across from me, her hair pulled back, her notebook already in hand. "You sounded urgent on the phone," she said. I slid the folder across the table. My hands didn't stop trembling. "This is bigger than anything you've covered. And it's going to cost me everything." She opened it and began flipping through the documents. With every page, her eyes widened. "Jesus Christ, Sarah, this isn't just one corrupt cop. This is a network. This is systemic. This is your brother, your parents. Do you know what this will do?" I nodded. My throat was so tight I could barely speak. "It will destroy them." She looked at me, her eyes searching. "And you're willing to do that?" I swallowed hard. "I can't stay silent. Not after everything. Not after Jamal. If I keep quiet, I become part of the machine. I will not be one of them." Claire leaned back, exhaling. "Then we need to be careful. I'll verify everything, cross-check the signatures, the payments, the shell companies. Once it's airtight, we publish. But Sarah, when this goes out, your life will change forever. There will be no going back." "I know," I whispered. "And I'm ready." When I left the coffee shop, my chest felt heavier and lighter all at once. Heavier because I knew the storm that was coming. Lighter because the truth was finally moving. That evening, I drove to my parents' house again. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to look them in the eyes one last time before it all came crashing down. The house looked the same as it always had, warm lights glowing through the windows, the smell of my mother's garden faint in the air. For a moment, I almost let myself remember it as home. Then I knocked. My mother opened the door. Her face drained of color when she saw me. My father was in the living room again, a glass of brandy in hand, watching me with a glare that burned. "I know you think silence will protect you," I said before they could speak, "but I can't stay silent anymore. I gave the documents to a journalist. The story will come out." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes instantly. "Sarah, no, you don't understand what you've done." My father slammed his glass onto the table, brandy spilling across the wood. His face flushed with rage. "You ungrateful child. Do you have any idea what you've set in motion? You've destroyed us. You've destroyed everything this family stands for." Tears blurred my vision, but I forced myself to meet his eyes. "You destroyed yourselves. I'm just refusing to cover for you anymore." My mother sobbed, shaking her head, whispering my name like it was a prayer, but my father's voice cut through everything. "You are no longer my daughter," he said, his voice low and seething. "You have chosen your path. Don't come crawling back when the world chews you up." The words sliced through me like knives, but they also freed me. For the first time in my life, I felt untethered from their grip. I turned and walked out, the slam of the door behind me echoing in my chest. The night air was cold as I reached my car. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, but my resolve was unshaken. The truth was coming. And I was ready to face it, no matter the cost. The story broke on a Monday morning, and by the time the sun was high over the city, my life was no longer mine. I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating endlessly on the nightstand. At first I thought it was just another reporter calling for a comment about Jamal's trial. But when I finally picked it up, I saw the flood of messages, dozens, then hundreds. Friends, colleagues, numbers I didn't recognize. The first text I opened simply read, "Turn on the news." I stumbled into the living room, turned on the television, and there it was. My family's name stretched across the bottom of the screen in bold letters. "Corruption network exposed. High-profile law firm and police department under fire." The anchor's voice filled the room. "Explosive new evidence has surfaced linking the prestigious Collins firm to decades of fraudulent contracts and systemic corruption within the city's police department." The documents, verified by multiple sources, reveal millions of dollars funneled through shell companies and approved by top figures, including members of the Collins family. My father's face appeared on screen, then my mother, then Daniel's. I sat down hard on the couch, my chest tightening. It was one thing to hand the folder to Claire. It was another to see the world holding it up in flames. By noon, the story was everywhere. Social media boiled over. Protesters gathered not outside the courthouse this time, but outside my family's firm. Television cameras camped outside my apartment, shoving microphones into the faces of anyone who entered or left the building. The internet had split into two camps, those calling me a hero and those calling me a traitor to my blood. Maria came over, her eyes wide, her phone buzzing in her hand. "Sarah," she said, her voice somewhere between awe and fear. "You did it. It's everywhere. They can't bury it anymore." I shook my head, still staring at the screen. "No, I didn't do it. The truth did." She sat beside me and wrapped an arm around my shoulders. For the first time in days, I let myself lean into her. That evening, Daniel called. I almost didn't answer, but something in me wanted to hear his voice one last time. The moment I picked up, his rage poured through the line. "You think you've won? You've destroyed everything. Our parents are ruined. The firm is in ashes. You think the world will thank you for this? They won't. They'll eat you alive." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tight. Better eaten alive by the truth than rotting from lies. His voice dropped, low and venomous. "You are pathetic. You will never work again. You will never be safe again, and you will never be family again." I took a shaky breath. "Maybe not, but I will be free." And then I hung up. My parents never called. They never sent a letter. The only words they had left for me were the ones my father had already spoken. "You are no longer my daughter." For a while, the silence hurt more than anything. At night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had made the right choice. I would see my mother's face in my mind, hear her broken whisper of my name. I would hear my father's rage, and the loneliness would come rushing back. But every morning, I forced myself out of bed. And every morning, I remembered Jamal. A week after the story broke, he came to see me. He wore simple clothes, his smile lighter than I had ever seen. He hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs would crack. "You didn't just save me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved a lot more people. Do you know how many families are coming forward now? Do you know how many cases might be reopened because of what you did?" Tears blurred my vision. "I didn't save anyone. I just told the truth." "Exactly," he said. And that's what nobody else was brave enough to do. In the weeks that followed, investigations spread like wildfire. Other officers were suspended, other lawyers fell. Families who had been silenced for years stepped into the light. People I had never met stopped me on the street, shaking my hand, thanking me. Some whispered that I had ruined the city's most powerful family. Others said I had saved its soul. There were still threats, anonymous letters, late-night calls. My apartment was vandalized once, the word traitor spray painted across the door. But the fear that had once paralyzed me no longer owned me. I had chosen my side, and I would live with it. One evening, Maria and I sat on the pier again. The same pier where weeks earlier I had stood alone, clutching the folder, terrified of what choice I might make. Now the air was cool, the water calm, the sun setting in gold and crimson. Maria nudged me with her shoulder. "You know, you could have stayed quiet. Nobody would have blamed you, it would have been easier." I smiled faintly. "Easier isn't the same as right." She raised her bottle. "To doing what's right." I raised mine too. To justice, to truth, to starting over. We drank, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. In the weeks that followed, I built a new practice, small, independent, focused on defending those who had no one else. The kind of people the system chewed up and spat out every day. I no longer had the Collins name behind me, but maybe that was my greatest strength. For the first time, I was free to be just Sarah. Some nights, the loneliness still pressed hard. Some nights, I still missed the family I had lost, even if that family had been built on lies. But when I looked at the faces of the people I fought for, when I saw the relief in their eyes, I knew I had chosen the only path I could live with. Because in the end, the real verdict wasn't the one the jury gave Jamal. It wasn't the headlines or the investigations. It wasn't the fall of my family or the threats I endured. The real verdict was the one I gave myself. I chose honor, I chose truth, and I chose to carry the weight of it no matter the cost. That was my sentence. And for the first time in my life, it was a sentence I could live with. Justice is never easy. Truth is never gentle. The path to honor is paved with loss, with sacrifice, with the silence of people who once swore they loved you. But in the end, family names fade, reputations crumble, wealth turns to dust. What remains is the choice you make when no one is watching. I chose to stand for those who could not stand for themselves. I chose to believe that even one voice, trembling but unbroken, can shift the weight of the world. And though I lost everything I thought I needed, I gained the only thing that truly matters: peace. The verdict of my life is not written in the courts, nor in the papers, nor in the whispers of those who despise me. It is written here, in the quiet of my heart, where truth finally feels at home. And that is the sentence I will live by.